me. You already made everybody think I'm crazy. You already took my family away. You already separated all my friends. I don't got no celebrity friends.
You think about if Harley was part of intelligence, right? What kind of people you think are surrounding my kids? What kind of people you think are in that house?
The atmosphere in the courtroom was more than tense. It was stifling. Not a single seat in the gallery was empty, and every gaze was locked onto Ye as he approached the witness stand. This wasn't about tabloid spectacle or a barrage of unfiltered tweets. This was something more calculated, more dangerous. Knowledge. Clad in a sharply tailored black suit, his usual swagger was tempered, his steps deliberate. Yet, there was a gravity about him that electrified the room, a silent signal that something pivotal was about to occur. No one dared speak. Even the faint rustle of reporters' pens seemed to vanish into the thick silence. Then, the judge brought his gavel down with a sharp crack cutting through the murmurs like a blade. And Ye began.
Michael Jackson at a party in Los Angeles. Apparently, a bunch of celebrities got together and they were having a tribute party for Michael Jackson. And one of Michael Jackson's songs was playing. What was the name of the song?
A Man in the Mirror.
Man in the Mirror was playing. There we go. And you know, the celebrities like Queen Latifah, Wesley Snipes, Hill Harper, they were all dancing, having a good time.
The first words out of Ye's mouth hit the courtroom like a thunderclap. He wasn't there to talk about his music, his controversies, or the chaos of his public persona. He was there, he declared, to pull back the curtain on a system he claimed had been operating in secret for decades. At the center of that system, he alleged, stood one man, Diddy Combs. A hush fell over the gallery, a collective intake of breath, as Ye began to spin a narrative that was as chilling as it was surreal. This wasn't just about the music industry, he said. This was about a machine, powerful, hidden, and ruthless. A machine that thrived not only on talent and ambition, but on manipulation, coercion, and control. A machine, he claimed, that didn't hesitate to destroy its brightest stars when they strayed too far from the script. He didn't meander. He connected the dots with unnerving precision, beginning with the death of Michael Jackson. Ye alleged that Jackson had been methodically targeted by the same forces that were now pursuing him. Central to his theory was a name known to insiders but seldom mentioned in public, Fahim Muhammad. According to Ye, Muhammad, Jackson's former head of security, hadn't just been a bodyguard. He claimed Muhammad was embedded in Jackson's life under the direction of Diddy and others, tasked not with protection, but with surveillance, isolation, and control. Muhammad, Ye argued, was a key piece in a larger strategy to neutralize Jackson before turning their focus on the next threat. Hushed murmurs rippled through the gallery. The room was no longer just a courtroom. It was the stage for a reckoning.
Guys, they found underground tunnels at Diddy's homes. This was first brought up by Shadow of Ezra, where he talked about the underground tunnels in Diddy's luxurious Los Angeles mansion. It was an underwater swimming tunnel leading to a mysterious grotto, reminiscent of an ancient and modern human.
The details Ye revealed were deeply unsettling. He recounted how, in the critical months leading up to Michael Jackson's death, the singer's trusted security team had been abruptly replaced. In their place, a young, relatively unknown figure emerged, Fahim Muhammad, a man barely out of his 20s and fresh from Sacramento State, suddenly elevated to the role of Jackson's chief of security. Ye didn't mince words. He questioned how someone so young, with little experience, could be handed the responsibility of protecting one of the most iconic and vulnerable figures in the world. The choice, he asserted, wasn't Jackson's. It was made behind the scenes by powerful forces in the industry, individuals with agendas that had little to do with Jackson's safety. To Ye, Muhammad was more than a bodyguard. He was, as he alleged, an enforcer, a planted operative with unparalleled access to Jackson's inner world. From his daily movements to his private medical information, Muhammad had eyes on everything. And according to Ye, that access wasn't about protection. It was about control.
This tunnel connects to the Playboy Mansion. You guys remember that? Hugh Hefner, the guy who lived with all those women in his mansion? There's no available evidence right now. However, reports are noting that Combs mansions do have a pool with an underwater swimming tunnel. They say it's not connected to the Playboy Mansion, but there is a reason why the Playboy Mansion keeps coming
And then came the bombshell, the voicemail. Ye claimed the Jackson family had entrusted him with a haunting recording from Michael's final days. In it, Jackson's voice was low, strained, almost a whisper, as if he believed someone was listening in. He sounded frightened. More than that, he sounded hunted. According to Ye, Jackson named names. He allegedly said that Puffy was behind it all, that a shadowy force was closing in on him, and that he feared not just for his own life, but for the safety of his children. The courtroom recoiled in stunned silence, followed by a chorus of gasps, rippling through the gallery. Even the jurors, stoic until now, shifted in their seats, visibly rattled by the implications. The defense sprang to their feet, objecting sharply. But it was too late. The mere mention of the voicemail had already shattered the room's composure. The intrigue had deepened, the stakes had escalated, and there was no going back.
Second option, I have you institutionalized again, where they medicate the crap out of you, and you go back to zombie land forever.
Ye didn't stop there. He drew a chilling connection between Jackson's fate and his own experiences, highlighting what he described as a recurring pattern, a system designed to control, suppress, and, when necessary, eliminate those who stepped out of line. He spoke of handlers, shadowy operatives embedded in the lives of high-profile celebrities, tasked not with support, but with surveillance and psychological control. For Ye, that figure was Harley Pasternak, his former trainer, whom he accused of threatening to have him drugged into compliance if he refused to conform. For Jackson, Ye claimed it was Fahim Muhammad. Muhammad, he alleged, wasn't just a bodyguard. He was a handler, deeply embedded and highly influential. According to Ye, Muhammad played a key role in isolating Jackson from his trusted inner circle, manipulating the flow of information, and tightening control around the star during his most vulnerable moments. In Ye's telling, Muhammad ensured Jackson remained compliant, cut off, and increasingly powerless in his final days. The courtroom, gripped by every word, sat frozen. The image being painted was not just of two fallen stars, but of a machine, quietly grinding away behind the scenes, shaping destinies and silencing dissent.
As far as Meek Mills, Puff Daddy, whoever, none of these all you fake hard you.
But the most jaw-dropping moment of Ye's testimony came when he expanded his claims beyond himself and Jackson, framing them as part of a much larger, far more sinister pattern. He described what he called a systemic takedown of artists who refused to conform, those who dared to challenge the hidden forces within the industry. Then he said the names: Prince, Whitney Houston, DMX, Amy Winehouse. Each name landed like a shockwave, echoing through the silent courtroom. According to Ye, these weren't just tragic losses, they were targeted. Each artist, he argued, had stood up to the system in their own way. Prince fought for ownership of his masters. Whitney tried to break free from years of manipulation. DMX spoke openly about spiritual warfare and exploitation. Amy refused to be molded into a marketable product, no matter the cost. And each of them, Ye claimed, paid the ultimate price. Their deaths, he suggested, weren't coincidences or cautionary tales of fame gone wrong. They were messages, calculated, chilling warnings meant to silence rebellion and keep others in line. The gallery sat in stunned disbelief. What Ye was proposing wasn't just controversial, it was seismic. A conspiracy not just to control, but to erase.
Civil lawsuit, Cassie said that she was the victim of abuse.
West's testimony wasn't merely an attack on Diddy. It was a sweeping indictment of the entire music industry. He outlined what he described as a sprawling, shadowy network of power brokers, executives, and enforcers operating behind the scenes with near total impunity. According to West, this wasn't just about profits. It was about power, about controlling artists, shaping narratives, and manipulating the very culture the industry claims to celebrate. He spoke of a system less concerned with creativity than with compliance, where those who stepped out of line were swiftly neutralized. He referenced legal cases like the one filed by Rodney Lil Jones, which alleged a criminal web of bribery, intimidation, and even unexplained disappearances, all allegedly tied to this hidden infrastructure. West also alluded to disturbing rumors from Jackson's final days, claims of erased security footage from the singer's mansion, of evidence that vanished without explanation. He alleged that similar tactics, cover-ups, media manipulation, and strategic silencing had been employed to shield Diddy and preserve the empire built around him. This wasn't just testimony. It was an expose, a challenge to the foundations of an industry long rumored to have secrets, and, if West was to be believed, far darker ones than anyone had imagined.
This is how he was rendered. This is a trainer, but come to find out, he was actually Canadian intelligence. But this is my.
The courtroom was spellbound. West's words lingered in the air like smoke, heavy, unsettling, impossible to ignore. Even the most skeptical jurors seemed to waver, their expressions shifting from doubt to uneasy contemplation. On the defense side, Diddy sat stone-faced, but the tension in his clenched fists and stiff posture betrayed the storm beneath his calm exterior. His legal team huddled in hurried whispers, faces tight with alarm and resolve. But no amount of strategy could erase the raw impact of what had just been said. West's testimony was more than provocative. It was seismic. A narrative so explosive, so intricately laid out, that it couldn't be dismissed as mere spectacle. It carried the weight of conviction and the gravity of someone who believed every word. This wasn't just a trial anymore. It had morphed into something far bigger, a reckoning that threatened to shake the foundations of the music industry itself. What West delivered wasn't just an expose, it was a declaration, a challenge to an industry that, for decades, had operated behind closed doors, unchecked and unaccountable. And as the courtroom sat in breathless silence, one question hung in the air like a warning bell. If West was telling the truth, just how deep did the conspiracy go?
They could control Charles Barkley. They could control LeBron James.
And just when it seemed that West's testimony had reached its climax, it took an even darker turn, spiraling into territory far more ominous than anyone had anticipated. The threads of his accusations began to twist into a vast, sinister web. One, so intricate, so deeply embedded, it threatened to drag the entire entertainment industry into its depths. If the courtroom had been stunned before, it was now frozen in disbelief. Ye began naming names, not just from within the music world, but from the highest levels of power, industry executives, corporate board members, even political figures. He painted a chilling picture of an interconnected machine, one in which every piece served a single purpose: to enforce absolute control over the artists who dared to rise too high or speak too freely. This was no longer about Diddy. Ye had shifted his aim toward the foundation of the entertainment industry itself. What he exposed weren't just cracks, they were fault lines, and the structure around them was starting to tremble. The silence in the room was total, not out of respect, but out of fear. Because if even a fraction of what Ye claimed was true, the implications reached far beyond one courtroom and far beyond music.
I ain't never been back to the hospital since 2015, but every time they say I'm crazy, it's just when I'm saying the truth.
What shook the courtroom next wasn't just the names, it was the methods. Ye peeled back another layer of the alleged machine, revealing not a brute force operation, but something far more insidious. This system, he claimed, didn't depend solely on threats or violence. It thrived on surveillance, manipulation, and psychological warfare. At the heart of it all, he said, were the so-called handlers, individuals embedded deep within the personal lives of celebrities. These weren't just trainers, assistants, or heads of security. According to Ye, they were operatives, loyal not to the stars they served, but to the hidden powers funding their positions. He described how these handlers gained access to the most intimate aspects of a celebrity's life. They managed calendars, filtered communications, and shaped the narratives around their clients. But more disturbing was their alleged psychological influence. Gaslighting, isolation, emotional destabilization, all carefully calculated to wear down resistance and ensure total compliance. Ye's voice never wavered as he laid it out, detail by detail. The courtroom sat in a collective hush, the weight of his words pressing down like a storm cloud. If what he described was real, it meant the loss of autonomy wasn't just a risk for high-profile artists. It was a certainty, enforced by those closest to them.
Those individuals allegedly included high-ranking supervisors in the business, personal assistants, security staff, and household staff.
West's own ordeal with his former trainer, Harley Pasternak, stood as a grim illustration, but then he shifted focus back to Fahim Muhammad. Ye insisted Muhammad wasn't some rogue actor or a one-off. He was the blueprint, the model for a calculated system. According to Ye, Muhammad's role in Michael Jackson's life, and later within Diddy's empire, was part of a deliberate, broader strategy. This wasn't about simple protection. It was about control. Control over sensitive information, the power to erase security footage, the authority to decide who could come and go. These weren't the actions of a typical bodyguard. They were the moves of someone deeply embedded within a machinery designed to suppress, isolate, and ultimately silence its targets. The courtroom hung on every word as Ye laid bare the lengths. This system would go to preserve its grip on power. He spoke of financial incentives and secret backroom deals, contracts quietly signed away by artists in exchange for hollow promises of safety or career longevity. But those promises, he argued, were mere bait. Once an artist was trapped, the system set to work, slow, relentless, and insidious. Ye pointed to contract clauses that granted labels and executives sweeping control over an artist's intellectual property, their image, even their personal relationships. And if an artist dared to resist, that's when the true pressure started, the kind that could break careers and crush spirits alike. One mini.
And they said they wondered if this is all just an act, which I would not be surprised. I would not be surprised if Kanye's, got the puppet strings going.
Ye outlined a pattern both chilling and compelling. He described how artists who amassed too much power, who fought to own their work, or who dared to challenge the system, would suddenly be engulfed in a relentless barrage of attacks. Lawsuits would appear out of thin air. Tabloids churned out damaging stories, often sourced anonymously, carefully crafted to ruin reputations. Friends, family, even longtime collaborators would abruptly turn against them, as if on cue. And then came the leaks. Grainy videos, compromising audio, private messages, all released strategically to dismantle the artist's public image, and just as devastatingly, to wear down their mental resilience. Ye painted this as no accident, but a calculated campaign, an orchestrated assault designed to isolate, discredit, and ultimately control anyone who threatened the system's grip.
Tell the truth, so hopefully we can get down to the bottom of this. I'm 100%, the charges against me are 100% false, and hopefully due to time, we'll start to see that.
The courtroom was gripped by stunned silence as Ye drew the connections between these ruthless tactics and the tragic deaths of icons like Prince and Whitney Houston. He argued these were no mere accidents or isolated misfortunes, but predictable outcomes of a system that treated its stars as expendable commodities. When an artist became more valuable as a legacy than as a living, breathing person, the system responded accordingly. Ye pointed to the financial windfalls that invariably followed such tragedies. Catalog sales would soar, streaming numbers would shatter records, and the biggest beneficiaries weren't the artists' families or fans. It was the executives, the labels, and the very institutions that had played a role in their downfall. But Ye didn't stop there. He shifted his focus to the present, to the swirling allegations against Diddy. He cited the lawsuit filed by Rodney Lil Jones, which portrayed Diddy's empire as a criminal enterprise built on intimidation, bribery, and the systematic exploitation of everyone caught in its orbit. Ye claimed that Fahim Muhammad's role within Diddy's organization was a direct continuation of the same tactics allegedly used during his time with Michael Jackson. Muhammad, he said, wasn't just a head of security. He was Diddy's fixer, the man who made problems disappear, sometimes literally.
U.S. judge has ruled that the rapper and producer Sean Diddy Combs will stand trial on federal trafficking and racketeering charges in May. He'll be held in prison until then. Sean Combs has pleaded not guilty to charges that he used his business empire to transport women and male workers across state lines to take part in recorded performances. If convicted, he could face a life sentence.
But Mohammed wasn't the only figure linked to these allegations, nor was Ye the only voice exposing Diddy's shadowy network of control. The courtroom had already been filled with whispers, stories from other victims whose experiences painted an even darker picture of what Ye called systematic exploitation. One of the most chilling came from a former artist signed to Diddy's Bad Boy label. This artist had recently stepped forward with claims that mirrored many of Ye's accusations: isolation, manipulation, and absolute control. They described being pressured into signing contracts that stripped them of rights to their own music, all while being funneled into a lifestyle engineered to keep them dependent, not just on the label, but on the system itself, and ultimately on Diddy. Their testimony revealed a grim empire built on fear and unwavering loyalty, where even the smallest act of defiance invited swift and severe consequences. Another name surfaced in the trial documents: a former producer who had worked closely with Diddy during his prime in the early 2000s. In testimony submitted as part of a separate lawsuit, this producer alleged that Diddy maintained his grip through intimidation and a network of enforcers. According to their account, anyone who dared challenge Diddy faced devastating fallout. The producer recalled an incident when they raised concerns over unpaid royalties, only to be confronted by one of Diddy's associates. The warning was unmistakable: stay in line or risk losing not just your career, but your reputation, your relationships, and even your safety.